Good morning, everyone. Wow, you might think, why the hell do we need a professor to talk about Profinet? That must be complex. No, it's quite the reverse. But so actually, I'm not going to talk about too much technical details, not about bits and bytes, but I'm going to talk about kind of the user perspective. So not too many technical issues. This is actually partly to keep my wife happy when she's in the audience here. Okay, while we talk about automotive industry, and so actually automotive industry was one of the early adopters of the Profinet technology, and we support the Profinet community by running what we call a test lab. So the test lab just do certification of products, and certification of products and of Profinet is one of the requirements to have a multi-vendor support. So we, as the test labs, what the test labs do is basically to make sure that the interoperability is there in the products. And on the other hand, as was mentioned, we run a company, and that company does audits and validation support in Profinet, and that is the background of my presentation. And we work together with a number of companies in Germany, not only the automotive companies, but as I mentioned earlier, since the automotive industry was the early adopter in this industry in Germany, that's the focus of this presentation. So the companies that you see here, they committed themselves 2004, that's more than 10 years ago, 2004 already to go for Profinet as the standard for Ethernet basics or Ethernet solutions. Okay, so I would like to use that as background for the presentation. This is just a timeline and a summary in projects that we were involved in terms of audits and system installations. So we saw a lot of installations, early installations and current installations, and quite also saw the kind of learning curve of the end users. So take that as background for that presentation. And I would like to go briefly kind of through that timeline. So this is actually the first installation that we saw, 2008 actually, Porsche Panamera body shop, and we saw roughly 620 Profinet devices there. At that time we thought, hey, that's quite a number, isn't it? 620 installations or devices, Profinet devices, just for the body shop, out of 3,000 network components. Now let's go a bit further and also think about what do we do when we talk about validation of a system or of a network. What would you think about what we need to validate? Any ideas? You all run no networks? I don't think so. But perhaps there is time for questions or discussion later. So one of the things is, if you look for validation of Profinet and networks, you don't see that. You wouldn't even see the cable, perhaps. So that's one of the things that why I would like to go into that from a different perspective then. So if you really go into that, this is what you actually see. Devices, drives, I/O modules, whatever type of field devices, but to see cables is different. You could physically check them perhaps, but you wouldn't even know which device is connected to which other device, because you can't identify the link between them. And therefore, when we do validation of Profinet, there is a number of things that you need to check, like the cabling. You would like to know what the configuration of the Profinet devices is. Is this compatible with the project that you defined? What is their status? In what kind of mode are they? What is the topology actually of your installation? With Profinet, we do not just have star topologies like in the IT, we also have line topologies. And you want to know, definitely want to know, where is this device located which may have a fault or a failure. And you want to know what the network parameters are. How close are you on the kind of edge, if you know what I mean. So it may run, but can we really be sure that it runs tomorrow? So that's things that you would like to check when you do audits and validation. And one of the outcomes, just show you an example for that on the next slide, is what you want to understand is what is the structure of the network. And what you see just here on this animated slide is, this is just Profinet. And I'm not going to talk about performance of Profinet and things like that. That's done. 10 years ago we discussed that, but that's just given. We just use that. What we use also on Profinet, and we also use features of that for Profinet validation, is the option and the possibility that you use the same cabling, the same infrastructure for engineering. You would use this for diagnostic purposes, and you would even use this for, at this stage I just call this other applications. So you could use this to run cameras on that. You could use to share quality data on that system. So different kind of applications up to Industry 4.0 application that we just saw when Xaver gave his presentation. So with the focus on diagnostics, we could just have a look at this slide here. What you see here is the topology. And those of you who are perhaps not that familiar with Profinet, what you see is a mix of star topology and even line topologies. And that makes life so easy with Profinet because you can create lines and kind of daisy chain devices. What you also can see here, it's indicated by a color, kind of a bar on each device, what the status is. So each block, each box here, represents either a controller, a field device, or a drive, whatever. So each of these boxes are Profinet devices, and you can tell what the current structure of that system is. Current structure means this is not the drawing from the engineers who designed this station. It's the actual physical link between the devices that you can just read out of the devices. So that's my message. All this information that we see here is provided by the devices themselves. Yeah? It's the actual situation in that system, and you can use the Profinet features to read out this information and create this drawing out of that. Okay, so just take this as background, and next step in our timeline, we do not go to all the individual steps, just a couple of snapshots. So the drawing that we just saw was from an installation that we checked in 2010, and at that stage we had roughly 2,500 Profinet devices there. Again, just for the for the body shop. So on body shop, 2,500 devices, that was quite a number at this stage. We also saw wireless applications, and we also saw a complete integration into the production network. What integration means, again, I'm going to talk about later. Okay, and then the next step, again, 2 years later, and another kind of application. Anybody saw that before? That's what we call, yeah, you saw that before, I know, Michael. That's what we call a framer. And you would use this in the automobile industry to fix the side plates of a car, if you like, before you do the welding of that. Yeah, to get a proper shape and proper fitting of that. You would use this just to give an idea of the size. There is now a person next to it, so it's a huge machine there, yeah? And somewhere in there, there is a car. It's hard to identify that, so I'm not going to into that now, but it's a huge thing. And if you look at the topology of that, this is it. So it's about 200 devices that are in there. Yeah? So again, somebody said today, roads grow while you walk on that, or something like that. That's kind of an example for that. Okay, so for that installation, we're now talking about 10,000 Profinet devices. Not just for this framer. For this framer I had 200, but again for the body shop at that stage, 2013 and 2014, we had an installation for body shop for a single car model. In this case it was this rabbit thing, or Golf as we call it in Germany, that had 10,000 devices. and you want all of them being operational. They create up to 1,000 data packets per second. You can try to calculate that. I think it's around 2 million seconds, 2 million packets per second that this whole thing creates. And you want to get this up and running and keep that up and running. Okay, and it runs. That's the good news. So what I'm trying to address is, over the last 10 years, more and more devices became Profinet capable. So more and more devices are linked together, so we get really huge systems now. And this is just 10,000 for a single model of a car in these production lines in Volkswagen Mexico. And a single line creates roughly 500 cars per day. Actually, they produce 2,500 per day. So they have more than 10,000 devices, as you can easily calculate, in that plant. And latest, when you talk about these figures, you start to think about asset management, I'm sure. Not only maintenance, but also asset management, because you have to think about spare parts and things like that. So I will come back to that topic later. And again, introduction into production network was important. And to give you an idea what this means is the next slide. What you see here is a real infrastructure, I mean it's existing infrastructure. And I'm quite happy that we can show that to you. That's again an example from Volkswagen in Mexico. That's of their kind of simplified structure that they have for the infrastructure. And what you see here down in that green area, that's a Profinet installation. And it's directly linked to the upper level of network, up to the office network. So from the technical point of view, you could directly not only identify, but also communicate from the office level down to the Profinet level with the devices. So that's just a touched area that of course also includes features like remote maintenance and other things. So that's one of the key features of Profinet. It's a single cable. We run I/O communication on that, but we also allow to communicate with the individual devices through IP communication throughout the network. And that's not a future, this already exists since years in the automotive industry, not only in Mexico. Okay, so with this as background, I would just like to go into another application which I think combines a couple of things, and I would like to address also the advantages that come with Profinet in this context. So, anybody seen this before? We call this the marriage station in the automotive industry. And this is to combine the body of the car, which comes here and here. So the body of the car comes from the top through a conveyor. And what you see in front of this picture is a kind of a shuttle. And this shuttle just kind of transports the bottom of the car, which is the wheels, the brakes, the motor, the engine, the powertrain, everything, that was assembled in a line parallel to this part here. So it will bring it over to here, puts it on another kind of conveyor, and then these two parts are being merged, okay? So that's what we call the marriage, between the top and the bottom of the car. Now this is a real application, again in Mexico. And this application, the challenge for that application was they had to replace that marriage station. So there was something before. They had to replace that, and one of the requirements was to minimize downtime. So they expected that to be replaced within weeks, within 4 weeks, which is a very, very limited time for this kind of application. And thanks to Profinet, that worked. So that was one of the feedback that the end users gave us. They wouldn't have done that without the Profinet. And one of the reasons for that is you can do a hell of a lot of the things in planning and even in commissioning in the days before you actually implement that in the plant. And that's different to Profibus also. Again, just to give you an idea, with this kind of installation, typically in the automotive industry, you would expect a car to be assembled every minute. That means if you have a stop for a minute or an hour, you know what this means in terms of revenue and cost. If you don't produce them. If you don't produce them, you can't sell them. So that's really a bottleneck thing. I'm not sure whether we should call this a brownfield application, but what I want to get across is Profinet is not only for new installations, you can also use this to integrate into existing applications. And to summarize what the requirements were, or what the feedback was from the companies, one of the demands and requirements was to have this installation within 2 weeks, so they were quite happy to achieve that. The planning and commissioning part I also already mentioned, so there are a number of advantages there. And they also use that, this station, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, they also use this to acquire quality data. I mean, especially in this station, what you need is to assemble these two parts of the car. And you wouldn't do that by welding, you do that with screws. Just a number of screws. 4 to 6 or something. And you want to make sure that these screws are tight, right? But not too tight, otherwise they would perhaps crack. So there is a specific torque that you would need to apply, and that's a quality measure, if you like, and a quality criteria that all the car manufacturers want to not only to make sure, they also need to track that and to store that. So just in case, they must be in a position and to come up and show, well, when we did the production, everything was okay. So actually, we do not, in this kind of assembly, we have automated screwdrivers that run with Profinet and then control the torque over angle of that screw. And at the same time, this torque is being measured, and this kind of curve is then stored as a quality data and archived. And this archiving data, they are also transferred through that network into a server system. This is nothing to do with Profinet, but we use the same infrastructure for that. So I think that's again is a good example for network integration. Okay, two other aspects then, briefly. Diagnostics was addressed in several presentations already, so I'm not going in too much details here, but one of the things, just to highlight that, is if you have such a topology view, you can use the parameters of the network to indicate if there is a bad link in that thing. If you have dropped packets in a specific link, or bit errors or things like that. So that's one of the things that come with Profinet. You couldn't do that with Profibus, but with the structure of Ethernet and the options of Ethernet, it's easy to implement that. Now, and finally, and that's my favorite thing actually, asset management. 10 years ago, nobody talked about this, because at that stage, perhaps nobody was aware how powerful Profinet could be used for that. But today, and again, I'm using the automotive industry as an application, with these thousands and thousands of devices, there is a challenge. I mean, you have to have spare parts. So do you know how many spare parts you need? Have you an idea of bill of materials of what you have installed? I mean, I'm sure in your companies, you have an idea of that. So every equipment, a machine that comes in, you have a clear picture what comes in. I know a number of companies that do not know what comes in. So they are in the position to find out, and it is, since Profinet is an integrated part in the network, and since the devices provide that information, you can easily scan the whole network and find out what type of device do I have, what firmware is on that device, what is the serial number of that device, and that all comes as a Profinet feature. So you really get a proper overview of what you have there, proper breakdown, and then on the basis of that can decide, okay, I need spare parts of this type, number, whatever. So we can really structure that, and you even can, of course, use that for revision management and other kind of application in that field. So asset management is becoming a major issue, and the end users are quite happy that they can actually implement it on their side. Okay, so to summarize the conclusions and what we have learned so far is that, and this is statements from end users, because we gave a similar presentation with Volkswagen, and not all of that is my statement, it's really from end users. So they were really happy to have these multi-vendor standards. They saw that planning and commissioning is much faster. And of course, they're quite happy with the diagnostic and maintenance features that Profinet brings in. And again, last not least, with the asset management options that come in with Profinet. So those were the topics that I thought it is worth to share with you. Thank you.